Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you to everyone in the audience that's joining us today. As Denise mentioned, my name is Neda. I'm an investor and head of studios at Avanta Ventures. Just quick context, Avanta Ventures is a corporate venture arm of a CSAA Insurance Group, which is a AAA insurer. We tend to invest in early stage companies within the insurtech and mobility space and what we call insurance adjacent markets. And we also have a accelerator program, which is the studios that I run. And also I am excited to be speaking to Diana and Veronica today. And the topic we want to cover is kind of the path to becoming a venture capitalist. And something that I wanted to also bring some context to is, I think we're all aware that funding to female founders is kind of lacking in terms of the correlation of the amount of funding that's been available. And although there's a lot of initiatives going towards addressing that issue, I think something that I'd love to pick upon today as well is how do we look upstream and leverage more impact by putting more women in those seats of decisions within the VC table. I think an All Rise report that some of you may have already read shows that female funders are twice as more likely to invest in startups with one female founder and more than 3 times are more likely to invest in a female CEO. So I think we need to invest more in women-led funds to help amplify and make an impact on the statistics that we all are aware of. And it shows, right? It's not just about making the numbers look good or making things more diverse. There's an actual business impact here. There was a Harvard Review study that showed that female partners experienced 10% increase with 1.5% increase in fund returns each year, plus about 10% profits within exits. So it's just good business to have more diverse teams. And so I think generally speaking, by adding more females to the VC table, I think we can make a bigger impact across the board and help with business strategy and profits as well. So with that, let's learn and hopefully we'll motivate and inspire more of you in the audience to join us and think about a career path within venture capital. And so with that, I'd love to start talking about how we got there. And so I'd love to turn the table and introduce maybe Diana, if you want to go first, and introduce kind of how you got to where you are and what the journey you took.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's great to be here with all of you. I think that these opportunities to connect are really special. And certainly there's too much mystery, I think, about breaking into VC. So I always like to, I like to break open mysteries. That's a lot of what I try to do in life. So a bit about me. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and went to college in Cambridge at Harvard for history, and then got into technology after that. That's kind of a whole long story that I'm happy to share another time. But from there, I spent about a decade in various product roles at big companies like Microsoft, and then startups like SoundCloud, and later Quip, which got acquired by Salesforce in 2016, soon after I joined. And then I was kind of there growing with the Quip team within Salesforce for the next 4 or 5 years. Then last year, while I was on my second maternity leave, I got a very mysterious note from a recruiter who was reaching out about opportunities at Matrix. I'm now an early stage investor at Matrix Partners. We lead pre-seed through Series A rounds. We've been around since 1977, doing exactly the same thing. So it's a really great team. But it was very strange to sort of get proactive outreach from them. And so I just decided to tug on the thread and see where it led. I think that there's, again, a much longer story about how those conversations unfolded, and I'm happy to share that during this session. But maybe the way I'd summarize it is that there are 3 basic ways to break into venture, I now realize. One of them is on profile, one of them is on network, and one of them is by content. And I took what I think is probably a relatively rare path, although we'll see what Veronica's experience was, which is breaking in by profile, where most firms aren't sort of proactively recruiting all the time the way that Matrix was. They're more passively recruiting. So this wouldn't normally happen in exactly this way, but somewhere at some desk, somewhere on the planet, there was a recruiter putting various terms into LinkedIn and turning up profiles, and mine came up. Mine came up for Matrix because we have a really strong thesis about hiring investors with early stage startup product experience. Specifically, people with a background in product managers, product leaders, product founders are the kinds of people we like to back, and also the kinds of people we try to bring onto the team. And so because of my product experience at companies large and small, I kind of exactly fit the profile they were looking for. And once we connected on a personal level, it all kind of unfolded very smoothly from there. But I would say that every firm has a thesis about who they like to hire. And when they do this proactive outreach, if your profile turns up in that search, then that's a really interesting way in. But it's not the only way in. And in fact, it's probably a rare way in. I think getting in through network and through content are two equally viable, if not more viable strategies. And we'll talk more about this as the conversation unfolds, but just to headline them briefly, getting into venture by network is about sort of putting yourself in the context of the kinds of people who are doing the kinds of investments you imagine you would like to make. And that can look a lot of ways, but I think that the way I like to think about it is just being helpful to a set of people that you want to be closer to. And you can do that even while you're in an operating role. So I think that it's something that you can run in parallel, and it takes some intention and it takes time, but it's definitely possible. I think content is probably the one that's the least used that should work the best, which is that putting your thoughts on the page, whether that's LinkedIn or Medium or your own blog, and putting them out into the world will often bring people to you. And you'll often discover opportunities that were never published, never mentioned, because people aren't opening up the opportunities to just everybody. They're kind of trying to seek serendipity and who pops up on their radar, and creating content and kind of distributing it through a network is a way to bring about that serendipity for yourself. So I think that whenever I feel stuck, I like to imagine what is the way that my agency and my content creation can be the solution, because then at least I feel better for the entire time that I'm composing that article or preparing that podcast, because I feel like I'm taking control of my own destiny, and often amazing things do come from it. So yeah, that's my summary, and yeah, happy to circle back and dive deeper on anything once we hear from Veronica.
Oh yeah, we'll be having lots of deep dives. And just to remind the audience, we will also be taking questions from you. So if you have any, please go ahead and pop that in as well. And with that, Veronica, please, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Anna gave a really inspiring talk just before this. So hopefully we can, add some more value for those in the audience who are curious about how do you break into VC. Just for background context, I'm an early stage investor, meaning pre-seed to Series A at Maveron. We are a consumer only VC. So we look for products and services that can meaningfully integrate into the life of the consumer. I'm personally passionate about consumers, so there's a ton of alignment there for me, both personally and professionally. In terms of my background and kind of the 60-second story of how I made it into venture capital, I think to your point, Diana, for me, it was more network based, but I'll start quickly from the beginning. I'm originally from the Seattle area. Growing up as a young child, my mom owned her own 24-hour daycare in home. So I got to experience at a very young age what it's like to have a mom who's a boss. And that really stuck with me. And, just kind of inserted a passion for entrepreneurship and really just helping women, minorities be successful in running their businesses. I went to school in DC, studied business, came out and joined Deloitte Consulting, focused on strategy in the consumer space. So spent about 5 years doing that. And a couple of years into my time at Deloitte, me and a couple friends launched a fellowship for entrepreneurs coming out of the African continent to the US, essentially coming to spend time at companies and whatnot. And that was sort of the first light bulb moment for me in my career, where I thought, wow, I can use my consulting skills to help entrepreneurs. And it brought back this, passion from my mom when I was young. And I thought, wow, okay, how can I do more of this? So I started talking to people who I trusted and said, hey, I'm interested in working with founders full time. How can I do that? Learned about an opportunity to help launch an edtech startup in Africa. So I moved to the island of Mauritius for a year as a founding team member of African Leadership University. And that was, my dipping a toe into entrepreneurship in a completely different country. I loved that experience. came back to the US and said, okay, I know I don't want to be in consulting. How can I move more into the entrepreneurship ecosystem? Started working with local accelerators in the DC area. And that's when I started learning about the challenges women and minority founders were facing when it came to getting funding. And so that was a big problem. Neda, you mentioned some of those stats that really haven't changed since I really surfaced this about 4 years ago for myself. And I thought, well, maybe I can have more impact in the venture ecosystem, right? Maybe if I'm on the funder side of the table, I can help bring a different perspective. I can help raise the voices of founders who don't look like the typical founders we see in TechCrunch or Forbes. And so that's what I did. I purposefully pursued sort of breaking into venture. And I ultimately, went back to school to get my MBA. I did a couple internships in venture during my time in school, and then was coming out of school last summer. We all know George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of raising of the issues of the lack of diversity in venture capital, both on the who's getting the money and then who's actually sending the money. So I don't know if folks remember the whole, hashtag send the wire, make the hire. There was a lot of pressure, I think, on VCs around lack of transparency and how they hire and how they identify founders in terms of new investment opportunities. And so my fund, Maveron, which when I started kind of pursuing venture was a dream fund for me. We were founded originally in Seattle. That's where I'm originally from. We have that early stage focus on consumer. That's something I'm very passionate about. And my fund has always, well, not always, but for the last at least 10 years, we've had a woman GP on our team. So that was also very important to me. So anyway, Maveron was sort of like, dream fund, I'm going to put you on this shelf over here, but there's no way you're going to be hiring when I'm looking. And then, coming out of all of that last year, in the middle of last year, Maveron publicly posted that they were hiring a senior associate for the first time in the fund's 23-year history. And so I applied. And I'm happy to dig deeper into networks or things that I did that I think can be repeated that helped me kind of land the role at Maveron. But I'll pause there and say that's ultimately the kind of quick 60-second version of how I ended up at my dream fund.
Yeah, and I think that's where we kind of want to take it next is things that we've done that are repeatable, or things that people can kind of also imitate if they want to take that path. But I did want to echo a couple of things you guys said, in that I think there are, you've nailed basically the three main buckets of ways, and I think the audience should really take that away. And you talked about content. I usually refer to that as, build a brand for yourself around a specific area of expertise, or become a thought leader. And there are multiple ways you can do that, as simply as just start writing a blog. My journey was also not like the other two. I actually was an immigrant from Iran to England, and then I immigrated here to the US. I knew nothing about entrepreneurship. I did not go to a well-known school. I can't talk today. And so, but again, it was through my network. I had to make a very asserted effort to get into a specific network. And some of it was by luck, but then after that, it's about how you use that luck. And so if I was you, I know it's a bit harder with COVID these days to go to events and network, but be creative. And I think through content, you can definitely do that. And a lot of the positions I've got throughout my career was because of the network and people referring me, because I built that brand. Or, how you treat people matters, and people remember that. I think something a founder once told me, Neda, it wasn't what you told me, it was how you treated me. And always so kind of be conscious about how you build those relationships and maintain them as well. And with that, I do want to talk about things that you guys have done that you would recommend the audience do that is repeatable, or, if they necessarily, maybe it's okay to do the traditional path of, you graduate undergrad, you do consulting, and then you get your MBA. Or maybe you start a company as a founder, and then you go into VC. There are things that it's okay to take that path too, but would love to hear from you both advice that you have, that things that people can actively be doing that you may have done that would be helpful in getting them onto that path into VC.
Yeah.
Maybe Veronica, we'll start with you.
Sure. And I think, Neda, you said it, right? Be creative. I think that's my number one piece of advice is be creative and hustle. worked in consulting, but I worked in the District of Columbia. We do not have a tech ecosystem there. I did go get my MBA, but I went to Kellogg. It's not in San Francisco or the Bay Area or in New York. So from my perspective, I do and did kind of feel like I was coming from outside of that network. Definitely Kellogg helped to give me some credibility, right? As a Black woman, I didn't have a finance background. When I looked at people's profiles who were already in VC, you know, it was at the senior associate kind of pre-partner level. Majority of them did have like an MBA from a top MBA school. So I was like, okay, well, how can I earn that credibility? Because as women, we face that all the time in our careers. We're obviously very smart, but sometimes you have to show that on paper. And so anyway, one thing that I did was just really tried to hustle and build that network. So, you know, while I was in DC, like working at local accelerators, just to kind of tap into the entrepreneurship kind of ecosystem that existed there. You know, so that's one piece of advice that I would give to folks. What are the resources around you that you may not know you have that could actually help you break into venture? Another thing that I would say is like, are you working at a VC-backed company today? Can you chat with your investors? Maybe you are, maybe you're not, but that's something to consider. Or, you know, are you an expert in an industry or business function? Can you leverage that expertise? I think, you know, both of you have talked about the power of content. Can you publish content? You know, reach out to VC firms that you admire. We talk to experts or want to talk to experts all the time, right? So how can you be creative in terms of starting to build out those networks? When I was at Kellogg, I came to San Francisco January through March. We had a program that allowed me to study and take classes here. This is right before everything shut down, essentially. But while I was in San Francisco, I literally was going to every event. I was going like 4 events a night. Now, you have to be creative now, and you have to go to like all the virtual events you can. But, you know, for me, it was, okay, I'm going to go talk to whoever was on this panel, maybe 1 or 2 of them at the end of this panel. So from a virtual perspective, right, like email us after this if you're interested in VC, right? Don't be afraid to just email someone and say, hey, I heard you talk on, you know, the Women in VC, whatever the panel title is, and see if they reach back out to you. But what I will share is that I went to a Google for Startups panel, and it was first round partner Finn Barnes. He's no longer at first round, but he was there at the time, and he was moderating a panel with a couple of his founders. And, you know, you go to panels and you hear people talk and you're like, oh, they're smart. Like, that's really interesting. But then sometimes you go to a panel and you hear someone speak and you're like, oh my gosh, can you please mentor me? That is how I felt about Finn Barnes. I just like was, oh my gosh, I was very like awe-inspired. And so we started chatting at the end of the panel. And I told him, you know, I'm in school, I'm pursuing a career in venture capital. And he said, oh, I'm hiring for a chief of staff. You should apply. And I was kind of taken aback by that because I didn't realize people actually, you know, tell people to apply for jobs at receptions or things like that, but it happens only once ever to me. And anyway, I applied for the chief of staff role. I interviewed all the way to the final round and I didn't get the job and I was devastated. But he said to me, you know, you didn't get this job, but I really want to help you. So let me know if there's ever anything I can do to help you kind of as you pursue whatever's next. And so I said, okay, great. That's a trump card, right? Like if ever I need him to help me, maybe he will, maybe he won't, but I just at least appreciate the fact that 1, he didn't hire me, but he's still willing to help me. And so when Maveron posted that they were hiring, I reached out to him. Well, I reached out to everybody that I knew essentially. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm going to apply for this job. Do you know anyone at Maveron? And he said, you know, I think I might know someone. He got back to me. He said, I might know someone. I'll let you know. And then a few weeks later or whatnot, he emailed me back and basically forwarded the email he sent to Maveron. And he ended up sending an email to our managing partner at our fund, our co-founder of our fund, highly recommending me for the role, which I was just so appreciative of. And then after kind of joining the firm a few months later, heard from my managing partner that was really important to him. And so it wasn't the only reason why I was hired. Actually, Maveron did a blind process for the first couple of rounds. And I did see someone dropped a question around what VC hiring process is like. So happy to chat about that. But it mattered. It made an impact. And so you just never know what connection or who in your network could provide value down the road in terms of helping you break into venture. So that would be creative and hustle and kind of use resources you may not think you have to build out the networks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Veronica. And I just also wanted to point out, I know in these panels, we always talk about things that went well or people that have done really nice things for us, but I want to iterate, for me personally, for every one or two things that have been amazing experiences, there's probably been 15 to 20 no's, slam doors, or who are you? Are you kidding? Go away. So I just want people to know that rejection is part of the process. And I know it's painful and it sucks, but don't let it discourage you, because we've all been there. People that you look up to, I guarantee they've been rejected many times. And then, you just have to keep going, because you will get your shot. If if you have that grit and that hustle, as we mentioned, just keep going and just keep trying and being creative. Learn from that experience and what can you maybe do differently. And I think that will define you. I think someone said, how can you stand out as a question? That's one of the things is like, founders, especially, we want resilient founders to invest in, and they are putting out fires 24/7, getting rejected and being told no all the time, right? And then as a VC, you kind of need that personality too, especially to get those doors open. So I just wanted to kind of point that out real quick as well. And Diana, your thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'll just quickly say I was definitely devastated that I didn't get the job at first round and probably cried for about half a day. But then you fast forward like 6 months later and Finn left first round. So had I gotten the job, I might have been out of a job in 6 months. So I firmly believe everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to underline this point of creativity that Veronica brought up. VC is a self-directed role, and it's that way all the way up to the top. Nobody's just sitting there getting great deal flow in their inbox with no effort. Certainly once you're embedded in a network, more does flow to you, but you're always thinking about what could I go be proactive about? And so it never stops, even at the highest levels. And so, interviewing for VC roles is also a self-directed process, because part of what the firm is testing is how creative and proactive you can be. Now, that's a little lazy on their part, because that means they're not really creating a structured process. And at a company, we would consider that like them not doing their job. But in this context, it's kind of a way of seeing how persistent will you be, how creative can you be, how can you use communication and personality to get an edge. How can you find your way into an intro? Because, the substance of my everyday work is about connecting with 10 to 30 new people a week. And some of that comes to me, some of that is outbound from me, but all of it involves really nuanced creative communication. And so I think that if you feel like there's no process, that's because the process is you prove that you can figure it out. And so I just hope that gives people hope in terms of like, this feels loosey-goosey. Maybe there's no path forward, but maybe there is a path forward, and you can just keep at it and keep trying new angles in order to break in. And that will be part of how you prove that this is the job you can do. In terms of repeatable strategies, I think that one thing that really amazed me in my process with Matrix, which lasted 4 or 5 months, was that it felt like a referendum on everything I'd ever done. Things I'd done back in college, the Internet Culture Conference I organized, people I'd worked with almost a decade ago that like happened to be connected to investors at Matrix, all kinds of things that you really end up feeling like, wow, it all did matter. And like, actually a little paranoid, because you're like, oh, I thought, I convinced myself that no one was watching me that closely, but actually they were, and it all comes to light in a VC process. Those processes are very kind of deep, because it's a role with so much responsibility. If you can't trust an investor to write a multi-million-dollar check on behalf of the fund, then they can't really do their job. So there's a lot of really intense vetting along the way, and to figure out how you're respected by your community and former colleagues. So I think that the basic repeatable action there is just to be good to everyone you meet and always act with integrity. You don't have to be everyone's best friend, but you want the last email in their inbox from you to be one that when they search for your name, like they'll they'll think well of you and they'll think that's a person who acted with integrity, even if they were telling me no, even if they were doing something that I disagreed with, that's a person who acted with integrity. And then beyond that, just viewing your entire career as a chance to kind of create these signature moments. I think of it as, every 6 months, I should have something proactive that I put out into the world that can be the thing that I talk about when I'm talking about what I'm all about. And I kind of organically did that for a lot of my career with the Internet Culture Conference or with a technology book club that I organized, or I even had like a kind of wild internet club called 24-Hour Book Club, where you would like read a book in 24 hours. So lots about books in my world because I like books. But I think that that's kind of something where if you're viewing VC as a long-term opportunity, thinking, what can I do in the next 6 months that'll be a signature thing that helps to encapsulate everything I'm about, that will create some noise and ripple effect in my community, but also add value and bring meaning to my life in the present. That's a way to take agency over what can otherwise be a very long and winding road.
I know we only have a few minutes, so I'll try to get to one of the, I think hopefully a quick question from the audience is, what do you like most about working in VC? Maybe Veronica.
Yeah, so I pursued VC because I wanted to help make the ecosystem more equitable for founders. And so my hypothesis there was that I would really enjoy working with founders, meeting other investors. And that has definitely rung true. I mean, when I think about it, I get to spend every day hearing people share their biggest dreams and visions for their lives with me. How many of your friends do you tell your biggest secrets and dreams to? Probably you can count on half your hand. And so it's just a real privilege to be able to be in that position and hear those stories, hear those dreams, and see them take shape over time as well. Yesterday was my 1-year anniversary at Maveron. So there's founders that I talked to, thank you, at the pre-seed stage who, have now just raised incredible Series A rounds. And it's just, that is really what drives why I'm here. I am just so passionate about helping founders achieve their dreams. And that's what I love about VC. It's a privilege. It really is a privilege. You're helping to fund the companies of tomorrow. And if we don't have diverse voices in that room, how can we make sure that tomorrow reflects what our country will look like tomorrow?
Definitely. Diana?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much I love about it. But really what gave me clarity that this was the job for me is that I like to learn and I like to help, and I get to do both in this job every day. Very similar to Veronica, I think, but it's a very self-directed role. So you shape it not only at a high level in terms of following your own interests and building your own community of deeper and deeper relationships, but also you can reshape it over time. And I think that flexibility and like the pressure to continuously evolve really keeps me on my toes, and also very humbling. But I think that being humbled is like part of knowing that you're learning. And I love being here because of that.
Well, I think you guys have covered it too, and I know we're out of time. So thank you both for sharing your stories, and the audience for being here. And hopefully we were able to share some wisdom. And as we all mentioned, please feel free to find us on LinkedIn and reach out. I'll also